Life isn't fair. No. Yeah, her husband is shaking his head. What? But she's right. And my guess is somewhere in life, whether you were 6 or 20 or 40 or 80, you said, this isn't fair. Because there are times when life isn't fair. Now, when I was a kid and I would use that statement on my mother, she would always say this in response. You're right, life isn't fair, that's why you need Jesus. Well, what do you say then, right? There's nothing you can come back with. So she used to tell us that all the time. I did not fully understand that statement until later in life. When I was young and she'd say it, I'd be like, ugh, right? But the more I grew into understanding how life wasn't fair, and the more I grew into understanding about the grace and life of Jesus Christ, the more I realized, yeah, life is never going to be fair. We do need Jesus. You know, and there are some people out there who, for some reason, and I do not believe this comes from at least the mainline church, who believe the more I follow Jesus and the closer I get, the easier life will be. That is not true. Nowhere does it say that in Scripture at all. Life is unfair for those who are with Jesus and those who are without Jesus. Life is unfair for those who are terribly close to Jesus and those who are far away from Jesus. Life just isn't fair because we live in this world and it's a fallen world. It doesn't matter whether you follow Jesus, but here's what does matter. When life isn't fair and you do follow Jesus, what happens next can change everything. Not only for you, but for all the people around you as well. Because what really counts is how do you react when life isn't fair? What do you do when life isn't fair? And that communicates to the world everything about Jesus. So I'm going to jump topic into a different topic, and then I'm going to come back to that topic. Are you with me? Whew, thank God somebody is. So, I have an Uncle Lester, or at least I did have an Uncle Lester. Uncle Lester was actually my grandmother's brother. So it was actually my dad's Uncle Lester. It would have been my great Uncle Lester. Now, Uncle Lester is one of those people in my life that is more fable than anything else. I only have ever met this Uncle Lester once in my entire life. So I have shared with you that my dad comes from Kansas. He was a farm boy, and when I say that, I mean farm boy all the way. My grandma and grandpa lived on an extremely large farm out in Kansas where they had beef cattle and pigs and chickens and all sorts of other things. The gigantic garden and the very large farmhouse that was like in the middle of nowhere. They had this lane that came down from the dirt road up above, and the lane that you had to go down to get to their house was literally about 3/4 long. It was very long, and on both sides of it, there were cattle in pastures. Because every once in a while, well, not every once in a while, when we were there, one of the things we would have to do every day, because there was no TV, there was no air conditioning, there was no, it was just farm life. We would walk up the lane once a day to get the mail. And that was our outing for the day, to get the mail. So, anyways, back to Uncle Lester. Uncle Lester was this guy who lived maybe 10, 15 minutes from my grandmother, but I never saw him. I heard stories. That's why I say he was more of a fable in my life. I heard stories about this man. And I heard stories about time in prison. I heard stories about living with all sorts of people, alcohol and playing cards, poker, and just all sorts of stuff that I was like, I can't imagine who this man is. One time when I was around 12 years old, we were out visiting Grandma and Grandpa out on the farm, and I can remember my grandmother coming into the room where my sisters and I were playing, and Mom and Dad were there, and she said something to the effect, Lester's coming down the lane. Okay. Well, my dad gets up and my grandfather gets up and they go out of the house. My mother gathers the 3 children over to her. Right there, I should have said, something's going on. And Grandma stays in the house, but Grandma is already in a bad mood. I mean, she hasn't even seen this man and she's already in a bad mood. So, I don't know what my dad and Grandpa did, but they went out and they met Uncle Lester when he got out of the car. Now, Uncle Lester is an older man. He was the oldest of the 3 kids of my grandmother's generation. He comes in and he's using a cane. And when he gets out of the car and he starts coming up towards the house, that's when my grandmother goes out and meets her brother. Mom is in the house with us 3 kids, and when grandmother goes out, she simply says, "Girls, this is your Uncle Lester. Don't say anything." Okay. So, Uncle Lester comes into the house after there's certainly some sort of discussion that happens on the sidewalk, because I remember my grandmother's hands moving a lot. Comes into the house, he sits down. What happened in that conversation, I don't even remember. What I do remember is that when my Uncle Lester got up to leave, as soon as he exited the house, my dad and Grandpa went with him. He went down to the car, but before he even got into the car, my grandmother had gone into another room, grabbed 2 cans, not just 1 can, 2 cans of Lysol, and sprayed the entire chair where he sat. Sprayed everything he touched, even the doorknob going out of the house. She sprayed everything. And I was like, I wonder what just happened. Now remember, I'm like 12. Later, because of that incident, I started asking questions about my Uncle Lester. I first started with my dad, right? Nothing. He's your grandma's brother. I know, but you don't need to know anything about him. But he's just your grandma's brother. Fine. Grandma, what about Dada, you don't need to know anything about da-da-da-da-da. Okay. So I finally learned not to ask anything about Uncle Lester. I still know nothing about Uncle Lester. But what I do know is that Uncle Lester is in my family tree. And there are things about Uncle Lester that apparently did not go well in society or in life. But he's still a part of my family tree. I don't feel like I need to hide Uncle Lester, although I think there are some things about Uncle Lester that have been hidden from me. Do I have any desire to know what they are? I do not. The only reason I bring it up is because generally we all have someone in our family tree like an Uncle Lester. You're thinking of that person right now. And if you can't at all think who that person might be, maybe it's you. I have no idea. But there's always that possibility. In the story today, we're going to read about an Uncle Lester. But his name isn't Lester, it's Laban. But I don't personally think he's all that bad. But some people think, oh, he's a conniver and he's all this, but I don't know. I think Jacob's the one that has more issues than Uncle Laban. But I'll let you decide. So we're going to start this story in Genesis 29. And we have Jacob, who we talked about last week. Jacob has a brother named Esau. Esau is the older brother. As you recall, when Jacob was a little bit younger, he stole the birthright from his brother Esau by pretending to be Esau, goes into his father, whose eyesight was really bad. He had taken animal fur, put it on his arms, so that when his father touched him, he would think he was Esau. Stole that birthright. That particular time, Esau didn't care. But later, he cares a lot. And we learned last week, he has vowed that he is going to kill Jacob. He is so angry over this. So Rebecca, do you feel like this is soap opera of soap operas? I'm telling you, that's what this is. This is a complete soap opera, and I'm trying to catch you up so you know where we're going. So Jacob's mother, Rebekah, finds out that her son Esau wants to kill her son Jacob. She wants to save Jacob because she doesn't want to lose her son. So she tells her son, I want you to leave the house, and she kind of tricked her father or her husband Isaac into helping this happen. But they send Jacob over to his uncle Laban in order to find a wife. Jacob has reached his brother Laban's house, and that's where we pick it up in 19. That feels like a lot. I hope you're still with me. But here we go, even if you're not. Laban said to him, you shouldn't work for me without pay just because we are relatives. Tell me how much your wages should be. Now, Laban had 2 daughters. The older daughter was named Leah, and the younger one was Rachel. There was no sparkle in Leah's eyes. But Rachel had a beautiful figure and a lovely face. Since Jacob was in love with Rachel, he told her father, I will work for you for 7 years if you give me Rachel, your younger daughter, as my wife. Aw, isn't that sweet? That's so sweet. Agreed, Laban replied. I'd rather give her to you than to anyone else. Stay and work with me. So Jacob worked 7 years to pay for Rachel, but his love for her was so strong that it seemed to him but a few days. Oh, it gets worse. Finally, the time came for him to marry her. I have fulfilled my agreement, Jacob said to Laban. Now give me my wife so I can sleep with her. Whoa. We're finding out a little bit about him. So Laban invited everyone in the neighborhood and prepared a wedding feast. But that night, when it was dark, Laban took Leah to Jacob, and he slept with her. Laban had given Leah a servant, Zilpah, to be her maid. But when Jacob woke up in the morning, it was Leah. Now think about this moment. You have seen this moment played on many a movie, probably on Hallmark. Well, maybe not many a movie, but it's been out there. The wedding night happens. Why Jacob did not know it was Leah the whole wedding night, I cannot answer, and I will not answer. Speak to somebody who's married, they might be able to tell you more about it. But what I can tell you is that next morning, something like this must have happened. Jacob wakes up. Jacob and Leah are back to back in the bed. Jacob wakes up the most happy man in the entire world. He begins to turn over and he sees the back of his beautiful wife laying there. And he begins to say sweet nothings to her, excited in the life together that they will lead. He very warm and lovingly taps her on the shoulder to begin to give her a kiss on the first full day of their beautiful life together. The beautiful woman turns over, and all of a sudden, Jacob sees the face of Leah instead of Rachel, who he thought he had been with all night. That is this scenario. So then we pick up the scripture. What have you done to me? Jacob raged to Laban. I have worked 7 years for Rachel. Why have you tricked me? Here comes Laban. Oh, good old Uncle Laban. It's not our custom here to marry off a younger daughter ahead of the firstborn, Laban replied. But wait until the bridal week is over. Then we'll give you Rachel, too. Provided you promise to work another 7 years for me. What do you think Leah thought in all of this? I mean, you know she didn't have anything to do with any of this. This was her father's work. Can you imagine what would have happened when her father walks in and says, Leah, you're going in tonight. Get ready. what? And what do you think Rachel thought when he said, Rachel, stay here? What is he doing? But Leah goes because she doesn't have a choice in any of this. And I hear what Laban has said about, well, it's not our custom. Don't believe a man who comes up with excuses afterwards. If this had been the custom, why did he make the deal in the first place? Now, granted, this was a custom in a lot of the world. I don't want to deny that. But he should have never made the deal. But in 28, we learn a lot about Jacob. Because this is what Jacob says. Verse 28. So Jacob agreed to work 7 more years. A week after Jacob had married Leah, Laban gave him Rachel too. All right, husbands out there, here's your big quiz for the week. How many of you would be willing to live as an indentured servant for 14 years for your wife? That is the right answer. Even if you don't believe it, just raise your hand anyway. Jesus will forgive you because it's important you have a good relationship with your wife. But this tells us so much about Jacob. And I'll be honest with you, here's why I think Jacob did a lot of this. Because I think there had to be some moment in all of this when he sees how he has been deceived by Laban. He has been tricked out of this marriage with the one he loves, Rachel. There had to be a moment in all of this when he had to say, is this how Esau felt? Because Laban tricked him. But at least when Laban tricked him, it was for his daughter. Now, I'm going to be very careful how I say this because we all understand this isn't right in any society that a woman doesn't have the right and a say in any of this. But in this day and in this time, she didn't. And this was a way that Laban could protect her. I see that. But when Jacob tricked Esau out of the birthright, the only thing involved in that was greed. That is it. Nothing else but greed. But I wonder if Jacob had any sense in him when he got so tricked and deceived. Oh, this is like what I did to Esau. When I tricked him out of birthright by pretending to be him. Now he has Leah pretending to be Rachel. It's amazing how family dynamics can sometimes be so horrific and ridiculous. And I would love to be able to say, well, this is just Old Testament. But you and I both know that these horrible things, maybe not exactly like this one, still can happen in families today. There is so much brokenness in families. There just is. But Jacob gives us an understanding of what to do when life isn't fair. Sometimes we also have to understand that sometimes we have been the culprit of making life not fair for somebody else. I can remember Ball State University. I was a student there. I was taking a class on small group dynamics. You won't believe this, but when you take a class in small group dynamics, they make you work in small groups. I know that's crazy. I'm working in this small group, and there's one girl who's probably my age. She joins us in our small group, and I can't remember if she came in like a day late. Anyway, she got to choose what group she was going to be in, and she chose ours. So we had to do a small group project, and this particular girl and I are not working well together at all. I mean, at all. We are just butting heads on this project left and right. I don't even remember why. But this has been going on now for weeks. And there was one particular day we are at the library at Ball State University because they had these rooms where small groups could meet. So we're in this room, we're going at it again. I don't even know what about until all of a sudden this girl breaks down and starts crying. And generally when that happens, the whole small group is looking at one another going, what do we do now? And so we just sat there for a second, and then she starts to say, do you know, and she's pointing at me, and you know it's never good when they use a finger and they point at you, right? And this is what she goes, you're the reason I joined this group. And she just starts bawling her head off. And I was like, oh, well, that can't be a good thing. Now, I'm not going to go into the full thing of what I felt and everything else, but I knew right then, all right, I've got to take ownership of what's going on here. Because she and I have not done well together. And I'm sure there was some way that she and I could have done well together, but I chose to not take the higher road, and I dug in. And if I'm going to dig in, let me tell you, somebody else has fallen, not me. And this girl fell. And all of a sudden, I felt the shame and everything else about what I had done to this girl and how I had mistreated her, because I knew better. I knew what I should have done and could have done. I just didn't choose to do it. And so right then and there, I had to apologize. And that's what I did. I apologized. We were able to talk, and then that small group worked better as we moved forward and had to continue the project. But I still remember that moment. I still remember that moment when she pointed at me and she said, you're the reason I joined this group, because she thought it would be fun to work with me. Boy, was she wrong. But boy, did I learn the lesson. Because I was on the wrong side of treating somebody, and she was hurt. There are times when all of us are on the wrong side. There are times when we treat somebody wrong. There's times when we dig in when we shouldn't have and force things to happen that should never have happened. There are times when we're just wrong. And sometimes it takes somebody else to point it out to us. We don't see it ourselves. And to me, I think that's what happened here with Jacob. Jacob never fully understood what he had done to Esau until he turned over and saw that it was Leah. And when he saw, he understood what Laban had done to him. And I think somewhere in there he said, is this how Esau must feel? Because he knew his brother still wanted to kill him. He knew all the things that were going on there. And yet, how does he respond? He agreed to work 7 more years. Do you know sometimes life isn't going to be fair for every single one of us? But how are we going to react in the midst of it? He could have grabbed Leah, taken his stuff, and marched home and let that be the end of it. Of course, then he never would have gotten Rachel. He could have taken Laban out to the community and said what a horrible person he is and what has he done, and just ruined his reputation and everything else. He could have done that. He could have violently harmed Laban. I mean, he was in love with Rachel. I mean, he'd worked for 7 years. I can't imagine the disappointment he had when he rolled over and saw it was Leah. But something in Jacob had changed. Rather than going at Laban, rather than running away, rather than just being angry, he said, I agree to work 7 more years. So a week later, because he had to have the week of the honeymoon with Leah, he was given Rachel to be his wife. How we react when life isn't fair shows the whole world more about who we are than anything else. And this is where I learned that my mom was so right. Because when life isn't fair, that's when we need Jesus. Because when life isn't fair, the one thing that always seems to happen in us is we get angry because we've been hurt. And then we've got to decide what we're going to do with that anger. We're going to either leash out at somebody, we're going to either break down, or we're going to leave. So what are you going to do when life isn't fair? What have you done when life isn't fair? This is when you need Jesus. Because it's only His grace that can bring things together. It's only His grace that can soothe the pain and the anger inside of us to make good and right decisions, even when life isn't fair. That can soothe our pain, calm us down, and remind us that even when life isn't fair, God has not abandoned us. So I ran across this type of artwork, and I have no idea how to say it, so I'm going to spell it for you. Kintsugi. Kintsugi. It's a Japanese art form. And the reason I bring this up is because in the Japanese culture, pottery is highly valued and important. And pottery has been passed down generation to generation to generation. But sometimes pottery gets broken. Now, here in America, if you have a piece of pottery and it's broken, one of the things you might do is go out and get some Gorilla Glue and try and piece it together and hide the cracks, right? Isn't that what we do a lot of times? But in the Japanese culture, they don't try and hide those cracks. But rather than throwing that pottery away, they reform it using gold. So what happens is they'll take this plate that may be in 5 pieces, and they will use glue, but in that glue there is gold. And when they put those pieces of pottery together, that gold crack in that pottery is emphasized, not hidden. And that plate, once it's dried and put back together, has a new value. They don't just toss it and throw it away because it's broken. They redeem it using this gold flaked glue. And it becomes beautiful pottery, beautiful things that still have great value. That's what God is doing with Jacob. Jacob is a deceiver and a liar. Now, he comes by it honestly. We see that through his uncle Jacob, but it's still who he is. But little by little, God is taking the brokenness in Jacob and putting it back together. He's not trying to hide his flaws. That's what I love about Scripture. Scripture doesn't hide the flaws. It shows them, because it also shows them what God is doing even in the flaws. And Jacob is being put back together little by little. And so he worked another 7 years before he goes home. And then he'll deal with his brother Esau, and that's a whole nother story. But there may be people in your family like Uncle Lester's, and people that make your family a little broken. But that doesn't mean that God can't do amazing things. There may be times in your life when the brokenness in your life is what you've led with, like what I did at Ball State. But that doesn't mean that God is done with you. All of your mistakes and all the things that you have done wrong, God can redeem. God's grace is like that golden glue. He's not going to erase what you've done, but He's going to make you better so that you can understand others and show His grace because it's been shown to you. Life isn't fair. That's why you need Jesus. He's our only hope. And Jesus is the only way for us to find victory, even when everything else is going wrong. Because His grace is the only thing that can glue you back together and redeem you so that you'll know that you are of great worth. As the band comes up for our closing, I hope you look at some of this pottery, because there's a bunch of it online, and I just think it's incredible that this new beauty has come out of all this brokenness. And it's that new beauty that God is making in you. You don't have to hold on to shame. You don't have to hold on to what you've done. Just know that God will take it and make new beauty in it so that you will find the victory that only Jesus can give.